Hello and good morning. I've got everything on cards, so I won't forget anything, I hope. I'm here today to tell you about how I came to write the book and then explain how I actually got it published. I believe people were going to be interested in that. I've got to thank the City of Cockburn for giving me this opportunity to talk with you. And all I had to do was donate one copy of the book to the State Library and one copy to the Federal Library, and Luba and her team have done all the rest of the work, the tea and the coffee and the cake, so many thanks to them. To start, about myself, I was born in England, in Cumbria, in the beautiful Lake District. I came to Australia in 1969 with my family, and so I have a very British and also an Australian background. This is an essential set of ingredients, I believe, to explain the one particular story from the book that I'm going to relate to today. My entire working life has been spent involved with computers for nearly 35 years. I've written countless manuals for computers, but they've been used worldwide, but they're all owned by the major corporations that I work for, and I got no money. That's an aside. Writing a computer technical manual is not why we're here today, but I'm just explaining. I have been a writer, but I've never written fiction before. I retired from the information technology industry in the middle of last year. I started on volume 2, but it's coming a little slowly. I've now lived in Cockburn for 16 years. My wife and I moved from suburbia to a 2.2 hectare block in Banjup, which is the most easternmost part of Cockburn. We grow most of our own veggies. We have about 24 fruit trees. I make wine jam. I make wine, I make jam, I make chutneys, I make pickles. We do our own olives, and we keep bantam chickens for eggs. Very rural. So how did I come to write a book? How did I then get that book published? What were my theories about writing, specifically for Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson? And to give a specific example from the story of the Colonial conspiracy. Then, if you have time permitting, and if you're interested, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And of course, I would like you to buy a copy of the book. So how did I come to write it? Basically, I was pestered into it. I was to write a single Sherlock Holmes short story. Two of my friends, Christopher and David, from my days at high school in Belmont, had each written a short story of Sherlock Holmes. So now it appeared it was my turn. I resisted their urges. But under pressure from my friends, I started to write my first story. Of the two friends, today Christopher has work commitments in Charlie Gardner Hospital, but David is here, having flown in from the UK on Thursday night. Mr. Malt, please stand up.
It's a sequel.
I'm sure he can share his side of the saga to you as well. Thus I wrote the first story. When it was completed, I found that I was completely hooked, as they say. It's very hard to stop once you've started. Inspiration often came very slowly, and sometimes it came very hard. My first story was called The Case of the Scotch, Soused and Strung Scotsman. In the published version, it is full of inconsistencies because I was relying mainly on memory. For example, I have Sherlock Holmes smoking a meerschaum pipe, which he never did in any of the Conan Doyle stories. It was only in the plays of William Gillette that the pipe was used. He also never wore a deerstalker hat, but I've got him with a deerstalker hat on the cover, which is another mistake. So it was all based on old memories rather than correlating with the published canon. Having written the first story, I then coerced my two friends. Okay, now it's your turn again. I was jokingly suggesting that if we had about 6 short stories, we could probably even publish a book jointly. So I started on my second story, in anticipation that they would complete another pair as well. I'm still waiting for those two. This leads me to a point in time where I actually started writing the third story, when David actually announced he'd written a second one. So things were looking good for a joint book, I thought. So I started researching a little bit into how to get things published. Obviously, you can do it the cheapest possible way. You just write your story, you print it out on your computer, you staple it together, and then you try and sell it to your friends or get it distributed through the library or whatever. But I can guarantee you, you won't recoup even the cost of the paper or the printer ink or the stapling. So you can then try and find an orthodox publisher and then sell away all of your rights, and you will get your royalties, but these will not be great. They will be based on the volume of sales. Most importantly, that publishing company will now actually own your book. You will have the copyright, they own the publishing rights. This is the traditional route that I had been considering until my friend David actually published his first story. He published a single story. He used a company called Lulu. That's lulu.com, Lulu.com. I know this is a very unfortunate name, but their services are totally, absolutely free. Well, free in the sense that they take their percentage of every sale of your book. What you do get is a registered ISBN, your international copyright, an entry into their internet site. But because Lulu does not widely expose your book onto the internet, a search engine will find it on Lulu, but nobody else will probably have a copy of it. And your returns are going to be limited. I think David can probably tell you it's something like $6.
As much as that?
So I looked at other publishing companies such as Lulu, which is a mechanism called print on demand. And I believe that this was the best option. I found a company called Ex Libris, that's capital X, Libris.com. And I thought that they might be offering me my best option. By this time, I'd written 4 short stories, and I was commencing on the 5th. So it seemed to me that it was probable that I should publish a book on my own rather than with my friends' stories incorporated. So what do Ex Libris actually offer? Simply stated, they offer all the services and options that you could possibly want from a publishing company. But they all cost money. You will need to assess what your publishing needs are and evaluate what your financial outlay is going to be. I'll paraphrase from the Ex Libris website, and it states why you should publish with them. And I will say that I'm not getting any kickback from Ex Libris. I did email them, I asked them for promotional material. They probably would have sent it if I paid for it, but they didn't. What they offer is practically everything, and you have to choose exactly what you desire of the extras and how much financial outlay that's going to make. You can even assess your own, you have to then also assess your own requirements, because they will charge you if they were doing the assessment of what they thought you required as well. And then you make an initial contract payment. I'll come to that in a moment. These are the conditions that they give to you. You retain all the rights of your book. The traditional method of publishing is that the establishment owns the rights of your book. You have complete control over the book design. You may need to spend more money if you want fancy covers and things like that. They're all extra chargeable things. You can publish very quickly, perhaps in a minimum of 2 months, where the traditional publishing cycle through the major companies is more like 18 months. You can have a hardback book, a paperback book, an e-book, or if you really want to spend a vast amount of money, a leather-bound book. Your book is then distributed worldwide on the web. You get royalties from every sale, and they're sent monthly. Your book will never ever go out of print. You join a club of about 20,000 authors with more than 25,000 published titles. You own your copyright, you get your own ISBN, etc. Then you have to choose from Ex Libris just how much money you're going to pay. It ranges from $600 to $22,000. The difference between American dollars and Australian doesn't make any difference at the moment. The extent of their options is so great that I can't discuss it here, but I have got a print off their website if anybody wants to read it. It goes through everything up to the $22,000 option. So anyway, check out their website. That's exlibris.com.au or exlibris.co.uk or exlibris.com. They have worldwide distribution. So I chose their $900 option. That produced this book, the one we're talking about today and I'm offering to sell today. I supplied the artwork for the front and the back covers. The package gave me the big poster here. There's a pile of bookmarks, postcards, business cards, and I got 5 copies of the book in that package. And I thought they'd done quite well. I got posted almost immediately on Amazon.com and got reviewed, which I thought was pretty good because this is the first publicity that I've done since the book was published back in Easter. So I've actually had 2 royalty checks come in and sold books and e-books without me doing anything until today. So I'm thinking it's a pretty good package. Ex Libris will print the book on demand, so you go on their website and you sign up for it, they will print it and ship it to you. Now if you want it overnight, it's going to cost the most. If you want it by regular mail, it's going to cost the least. The least amount from Ex Libris is $31.50. That's including the postage. The ebook version, however, is very cheap. It sells on Amazon for $10. You don't get a lot of royalties from a $10 book. The maximum rewards that you can get are achieved by purchasing the author copies, which is what I've done. You have to outlay the payment for them, obviously, and you pay the postage, and these are what you get, and these are the ones I'll be signing today. They're identical to the ones you would get from the web anyway. Okay, so now to actually writing your book. Well, you need inspiration, but one single germ of an idea can create an entire story. The example in my story of Sherlock Holmes and Jack the Ripper, there were two premises. They were, given the police could not solve the case of the Ripper, and had Holmes and Watson been real people, then Lestrade and the police would have gone and contacted Sherlock Holmes and said, help. Second premise was, the Ripper was never caught, so you've got to explain that. So I did. You need to do a lot of research, particularly if you're trying to bond together factual places and events with your own fiction, as is the case with me writing about Sherlock Holmes. You then need to do even more research to ensure that you've actually found the correct truth. And my reviewer at Amazon.com believes that Queen Victoria's first son, Prince Albert Edward, was a great statesman of Europe. He became Edward VII, the king. The facts of the matter are, he was a lecher, he was a drug taker, he was a liar, and he was a compulsive gambler. So he's hardly a great statesman of Europe. Then I decided I had to create a style. In my case, I borrowed heavily from Conan Doyle. However, I found I needed to recreate a written style, a grammar, a spelling set, punctuation set, and I felt that I had to get this into the true spirit of the time that I was writing about. I did not try to copy Conan Doyle, but I did try and make it fit together. Then you'll obviously need a computer, a printer, and you really probably need to have internet access. I've found it's essential to keep every draft of every story, otherwise your hard drive will crash. It's a law of computing. And you've got to back up everything, so don't just leave a copy on the hard drive. Then you'll need dictionaries and thesaurus. I've got a huge 2-volume Oxford English dictionary and a very big fat thesaurus. Don't trust your word processor, particularly if it came from Redmond. That's the company who make these glass things that I can't name. Now to explain the details of my writing of the story of the Colonial conspiracy. A story that links the fictional world of Holmes and Watson to the real history of Australia, and in particular to the history of Western Australia, and amazingly to the history of the city of Cockburn. A brief synopsis of the story. 3 Western Australians are concerned about the proposed federation of the colonies, dominions and islands in Oceania at the turn of the last century. The conspirators believed that Western Australia was not getting a chance to speak out. New Zealand and the Pacific Islands had already declined to join such a federation. The conspirators then travelled to London in an attempt to stop a British Act of Parliament from being enacted and from being authorised by Queen Victoria. It is their belief that the people of Western Australia should have a full say in the matter. Matters then go badly astray in London, and the government secretary for the colonies is accidentally shot dead. And in the process is created a classic locked room conundrum for Sherlock Holmes. I also then added complexity to the story by adding adultery and cryptic secret messages. So what are the links to the city of Cockburn? Well, the Atwell family were amongst the very first settlers. They landed here on the coast at Cockburn, where nearly all of the earliest colonists actually died. The Atwells were granted vast amounts of land here. Indeed, my own land titles are signed by 3 Atwells. There's now a suburb called Atwell. In my story, I thought I was getting a bit cheeky, so I renamed the conspirator Atwell to Atfield. Okay, so how are Holmes and Watson actually linked to Australia? I thought I needed to supply Sherlock Holmes with some facts about Australia. And Watson states more than once, Sherlock Holmes was politically naive. He did not care about governments and things like that. Then I remembered that Conan Doyle had made Watson make a reference to Australia. In the story of The Sign of the Four, Watson is holding the hand of his future wife Mary as they gaze at the excavations in the gardens of Sholto, where digging for treasure has been underway. Watson says to Mary, "I have seen something of the sort on the side of a hill near Ballarat." Therefore, Watson had been in Australia. So I invented an entire history of Dr. Watson's early background based entirely upon that one fact. There are a couple of others. For example, I'm ad-libbing now. When Watson and Holmes meet, Watson says, "I have neither kith nor kin in England." He does have a brother in Australia. His brother sends his dead father's watch to Watson later in the saga. So I'm going to give 3 short excerpts from the story of the Colonial conspiracy. But for the full story, you'll have to buy the book. I'm plugging. Okay, the first quote is the discovery of the Secretary of State for the Colonies. Quote, "We could see Sir Broderick Marchmount more clearly now than from the outside of the house. In proportion to his desk, we could see he had been a tall man, and perhaps in his early 50s. Dull steel grey eyes looked straight ahead. Dark hair was tinged a slight greying at the temples, including his scalp. But he was clean shaven. He wore a 3-piece suit of charcoal grey and a faint pinstripe tie. A red and white bow tie was at his throat. However, the dominant aspect was a bullet hole in his forehead." So the second quote is a little longer. Holmes asks, "What do you know of Australia, Watson?" "Well, I used to live there," said I. "Watson, you're a mine of local knowledge. Surely you will be of assistance in this case. Tell me all, even if you think that is not of relevance." So I proceeded to tell of my family, its childhood, and what I knew of the Australian colonies. My family moved to Melbourne when I was 7 years old. My brother Hamish was 8 years my senior. We both attended Melbourne Grammar School, but Hamish for only 2 years. My father James was a railway engineer, but he was not known as James. He was normally known as Hamish. I took my father's watch from my pocket. That's why the initials on this watch are HW. You examined it yourself, Holmes, 12 years ago, not long before I married my dear Mary. My father was killed in an accident in 1865, and my mother Rose and I returned to England on an adequate pension we got from the railroad company. My brother, however, chose to stay in Australia. He died there in poverty in 1888. We were not a close family. My mother died when I was recuperating from enteric fever, having returned from India. We lived in South Yarra, near to my school, but my father spent much time away. His company were building the railway from Ballarat to the goldfields. "I've heard you mention of Ballarat before," said Holmes. "I'd always assumed such a place with an uncouth name to be in India." "But what of the people of Australia and their governance?" he asked. "They're mainly British colonists, starting from 1788, but there are quite a few convicts. In 1850 the gold rush started and many Chinese migrated to the colony of Victoria. It was also in the next year that the colony of Victoria became independent from New South Wales. They taught us all this in school. The Victorians have 2 houses of parliament, with a governor representing the Queen. That's all I can tell you, as I've indicated. I was only 11 years old when I returned to England. Save from receiving this watch, I've had no contact from my late brother. As for the other colonies, I know little, save that New South Wales is the oldest and the largest, but Western Australia is the biggest by area." Holmes rummaged in his pile of books and found a World Almanac for 1898, and he read the entry for Australia. "What a useless load of piffle," he complained. "Hardly a fact of merit in the entire entry. I see that Western Australia was 30 years more behind the other colonies in gaining self-governance. All the others achieved self-governance in the 50s. I wonder if this is of any significance in this case." So the final quote is quite short. This is the final paragraph from the story. "So the case of the colonial conspiracy was over. The 3 criminals were judged only on the matters of the killing of Sir Broderick and the kidnapping of his daughter. They were bidden out of court never to mention the affair again. Strickland was convicted of manslaughter and served a mere 10 years in jail, a light sentence. Atfield and Manning each received 5-year sentences for kidnapping the girl Charlotte. The 3 conspirators never witnessed the establishment of the Commonwealth of Australia on January the 1st, 1901. 2/3 of the total of the West Australian population voted yes to join the Commonwealth. But the vote of the electorate in every case was no, save in Albany and the goldfields." That concludes my talk. I'm open for questions. I hope you'll purchase the book, and there's tea and coffee. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question, David?
Yes.
When did you first become interested in Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, I must have been 8 or 9 years old. I read every story, but that's when I came to start writing the first one, I was just relying on memory and films and Basil Rathbone. Things that weren't actually things that Conan Doyle wrote even. But yes, the real the joining component is the fact that David and Christopher had written a Sherlock Holmes story and said, now it's your turn to write another Sherlock Holmes story. So I obviously had to follow that path.
Excuse me. Can I just say, you mentioned that there were inconsistencies in the first tale that you told.
Yeah.
That's absolutely in the tradition of Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah.
Arthur Conan Doyle had many
I know.
inconsistencies.
I've got really good ones. I've got dates wrong. Like in one paragraph it says Tuesday, and the next paragraph it says it's Friday or something.
Doyle
Which-
had stories that began in April and a few days later
Yeah.
it's October, so that's...
Yeah. And there's also the case of Wisteria Lodge, where Holmes is in London while simultaneously in Tibet.
Would you happen to know, and this is, I don't expect you to have the answer to this, but I'm just asking on the off chance, would you happen to know when the Boscombe Valley mystery occurred?
I do, because I've plotted every story into my history line.
That was what I was wondering, because Ballarat's mentioned in that.
Yes, it is.
It's a key point, and I wondered if that was...
No, I have got it. I found using William Baring Gould as a guideline, where he tried to fit all the stories together. Plus, there are copies on the internet. Some fit and some don't.
Some don't, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I decided the best thing to do was write my own.
And I think everyone should do that.
Yeah, and I deliberately modified dates and wrote down Conan Doyle got this wrong, because Dr. Watson got it right, but Conan Doyle was his literary agent who fiddled with it.
Absolutely. That's
Passing the buck.
and I love, this is not a question, this is just a comment. I love that you have his brother Hamish living in Australia, because he had no kith and kin in England. But then when he does turn up with a watch, that's an absolutely magnificent connection.
Yes, but the watch came by post after Hamish died as a drunkard in Melbourne.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, spot on.
With Ex Libris,
Yes.
do they do the editing for you, or do you have to do your own editing?
You can pay them to do your editing. You can pay them to do the proofreading. You can pay them to do anything. But I have here. There's a list of what you get for each of their packages. I must admit, this is a very bad copy, because I'm a very frugal person. It's printed on the back of computer programs on one side and Ex Libris on the other side. I don't throw paper away if it hasn't been used on both sides. So, but on this side,
Nothing wrong with recycling.
no. And then it gets shredded and put in the composter.
Yes, save a tree and have some nice eggs at the same time.
Yeah. But there is a list of what you can get. Data entry, copy editing. You could even get on the church design thing if you wish. You can get electronic galleys, paper galleys, CD copies, or you can do as I did. You supply your own copy. I used my own word processor. I had it spell checked twice, but that didn't work. Obviously, I need to go back and have a second edition printed. And I might take your advice and leave the dates wrong.
You'd be in good company.
When you're writing, do you set yourself a specific time each day, or it's just as it comes?
As it comes, sometimes weeks can go by when I'm stuck. When I do get stuck that badly, I go back and I revise and hope it'll inspire me to start the next step forward.
That $900 package that you chose,
Yeah.
how many books did you have printed within that 900?
5 copies and 1 author proof copy. That's the physical book.
Yep.
When you do the final sign-off from, well, essentially that's an author copy. They're all identical because I didn't make any corrections to it, which I should have done. But when I did sign that off, immediately it went on publication on the web. So I didn't get my 5 copies until the book had already been reviewed on Amazon. I had my author copy, but I didn't have the 5 physical ones.
So the books that you're selling here today, do you have to actually buy them?
I have to buy them.
And is that at a cheaper price?
Yes, it varies on the quantity you buy. If you buy a few tens of thousands, you can make a lot of money. If you can find tens of thousands of people to sell them to. So I bought 100 books, and I think I've sold maybe 30 to friends since then. And I'm just selling them for basically the same price as Ex Libris. Because I think, well, why can't I make some money?
Well, you must be out of pocket, aren't you?
Yes?
Yes.
I'm hoping that you'll buy a copy of the book and help me be less happy.
I was just wondering about your selection process, how you chose your cover pictures. When I say selection process, I meant for the pictures on the front and back cover.
Well, that one's a genuine picture of a house in London with a 221B on it. And that's me. And that one is a massively edited photograph where the shapes of faces and eye colours and hairlines and everything else has been changed using a graphic artist program.
Did you do that yourself?
Yes. Now, Ex Libris would do that for you, but of course you'd have a long to and fro communication time exchanging what you want, because I couldn't get them to print the bookmarks the way I wanted. I said I want it to fade from one half to the other half. 3 weeks later it was still coming back with a solid line through the middle of it. And obviously when you look at some of their examples, the pictures that they put on the front are very generic type, black and white or whatever. But I didn't pay any more for getting it in colour. I did get a choice of, I think, 5 different styles for the actual layout, because I've got, because it's 5 short stories, it's not one story with chapters, and I've also got footnotes, and I've also got an index, and all of that came inclusive. They originally said you're going to pay for it, and then they reneged on that and said no, well, it's in the package.
This may be a very, on my part, very uninformed question, but I was never aware that you could. Does Conan Doyle get any royalties for you using his characters? I'm racking my brain. I don't know. I'm just trying to rack my brains as to how many other authors are there that I'm trying to think of other books where somebody's written their own stories using somebody else's characters.
There are hundreds of
Okay.
Sherlock Holmes
Okay,
stories.
well, I was just going to ask how many, if you knew how many. Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like to,
No.
it's your day, I don't like to take over. The Doyle copyright ran out about 5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes people ask the estate for permission to write, but they don't have to. That's at this stage, it's just a sort of a courtesy thing. But even the original stories, you can print those at your own whim, wherever you want, which about 5 years ago, if you look around, you'll find that there's like A4 sheets of very cheap quality paperback books that are the complete Sherlock Holmes, and it's because they came out of copyright, and when that happened, they let the market for a couple of years. But certainly many people are writing pastiches and stories using Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and other characters too, but just because that's the subject.
okay, the synopsis of what I paid for was $899 American dollars, or in a 3-month installment package. I got a choice of 8 cover templates, 5 interior templates, allowance for the art and the author photographs, book in paperback format, ebook, registered in all the print databases. Tracking of production is online, so you can see how many copies have actually been printed. 1 primary copy for the author, 5 paperback copies, worldwide distribution, assignment of an ISBN, registration in books in print database, registration with all online sellers, online sales and royalty accounting, author and book web pages on Ex Libris, where you can control the content, and they say here quarterly royalty payments. I've had 2, so I guess it is quarterly and not monthly, but it does say in the other documents it's monthly. I got 50 postcards, 50 bookmarks, 50 business cards, and 5 of these big things here. So if you then buy the author copy, which depends on how many you buy, depends on how much profit you make. But I have to buy them, I have to pay the outlay to get them, pay the freight to get them here, then I choose the price. So I'm choosing to sell for the same price as Ex Libris, or almost exactly. If you want to go to Ex Libris, you probably wait a lot longer than they say, because I can't believe they'll do a print run in America for 1 book and send it overnight. Doesn't seem feasible to me.
What are they charging? $29.99.
No, they $29.99. $29.99 plus postage. So I rounded the 1 cent.
Very sensible.
When you say it'll never go out of print,
Well, until Ex Libris folds.
yeah, okay, so that's usually some other publishers wouldn't be able to buy up all, say.
No, they can't, because Ex Libris do all the printing. So if you go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon or somebody like that, they are buying it from Ex Libris.
Because I've often gone on and there's something, it's a book I'm looking for and it's out of print, so that's usually the publisher has gone, so that explains it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that's why they're saying, you know, if they've got 20,000 authors and 25,000 titles currently available, they're just saying it'll never go out of print. Certainly, in my life expectancy, I'm not going to be worried about it.
Okay.
Yes.
I've got a question about your research. You did a lot in terms of the characters and the history and what happened. But I was curious about whether you ever did anything about locking a room in terms of testing the solution to that sort of problem.
No, I actually didn't. But I have got 2 locked room conundrums for Holmes to solve. Both of them have a different solution. No, most of the research I did was into the history and the characters and the fitting of all the Conan Doyle stories together into a cohesive whole that I could insert my stories into that framework. And of course you have to find out things like did he smoke a pipe and when did he stop taking drugs and why, which I have explained, which Conan Doyle never did, I don't think.
No, that's true.
Well, I did. He met the Dalai Lama in Tibet.
So there, wasn't that easy?
I've never read Sherlock Holmes, I must admit. Sorry about that. Sorry.
Oh, Luba, you bought a copy.
But what is a locked room?
It's where the body is inside the room and the room is locked from the inside and the murderer is not in the room. So how did the murderer get out and lock the room from the outside and leave the key on the inside?
It's problematic, isn't it?
Not for the Invisible Man.
The Invisible Man was invisible, he couldn't walk through walls.
Yeah, but Conan Doyle might have had him doing that. He
Well,
was
he
into
might.
all kinds of psychic.
Yes, yes. Well, I did write the second story I wrote was about Conan Doyle being Watson's literary agent, and the story starts off while Holmes is away in Tibet, so Watson is actually on his own, and he goes with Conan Doyle to a cartomancer, a card reader. And when Watson eventually explains what happened when Holmes returns, I think the final comment after Holmes has been through all the evidence that Watson collected, he said, well, you can make these cards tell any story you like. Which, yeah, that's the psychic component.
David, you know you were talking about the editing earlier.
Yeah.
It's true, isn't it, that it's important to get someone that's not just good with grammar, but is sensitive to the writing. So
Definitely.
how did you manage with the editing? Because that can really break a book if you get a bad editing, can't it?
Yes. My wife, in the back corner, did a lot of the editing, and would you believe an Argentinian in New Zealand did the rest? The reason for using an Argentinian, he's fluent in 6 or 7 languages. English and Spanish were his first languages, but he knows grammar and punctuation as he's absolutely backwards. You know, and I say, you know, is it who or whom? And my friend Dominic says, well, one's dative and one's genitive. You've got to know when to use it. And now I'm thinking, I can't remember when, you know, because I never, when I went to school, we never did English grammar. That was the year they stopped in the UK. But I did do French, German and Spanish grammar. So I do know what genitives and datives and things like that are.
Any questions? Right. Okay, thank you very much, David.
Thank you all.
Thank you.